Hello, welcome to Software Security Made Simple. My name is Damilare from Resilient Software Security, and today we'll be talking about cybersecurity draws. So the items of value in your cyber systems that you've got to be aware of to protect your business, protect your company, protect your customers, and even your employees from cyber attackers. This is so important because we cannot have resilient security without knowing what our cybersecurity draws are. Just like in your home, you cannot have strong security or good security if you do not even know what you're supposed to be protecting. The how is one thing, but before you get to the how, you got to know the what. And that's what we're looking at today. So how do we get started here? We've got on the whiteboard, we'll look at this example, but before we get there, how do we identify what assets are? You see, in the security space, what I'm referring to as draws are referred to as assets. So it could be network security assets, software security assets, cyber security assets in general, anything. It's referred to as assets in the security space. In layman's terms, we can call them jewels to really get what, the essence of it. But we refer to them as assets for the rest of the video. And how do we identify assets? There are two questions to ask. The first one is, any information or functionality related to your cyber systems that are critical to the success of your business or critical to your business being able to deliver on its objectives or its commitments to stakeholders. That's the first thing. And then the second one is any information that is processed or stored by your system, which is sensitive. For instance, sensitive information about your customers, personal information about them, date of birth or health, things like that, sensitive information about your employees, for instance, or sensitive information about your company, say your trade secrets or your intellectual property. All of those things are assets. So whenever you have a yes to any of those questions, you are almost certainly looking at an asset that you've, at the very least, got to take some time to consider how you should protect it. And if you don't protect it, that's a whole other conversation we'll cover in the video about threats. Now let's look at this example, but I also want to share briefly before we do that a more formal definition I usually give of assets is any information or functionality related to your cyber systems for your organization or its people, such that if an attacker were to access, disrupt, or destroy them, the organization or your business or your stakeholders will be negatively affected. So that's another way to look at asset. Okay, so now we've got this example here. We have some assets that are usually more obvious to people who are assessing systems or thinking about a system, and some that are less obvious, and that's why we've got those two options. So let's just pause. Do any assets come to your mind given what I just talked about? All right, let's dive in. We've got this photo sharing mobile app that lets a user share sensitive photos with however many people they want to, and still restrict who can access those photos. So you've got a photo of your newborn child, for instance, and you want to restrict who can see those photos. That's what this app is about. So we can see we've got a mobile app here. We've got an API that is exposed by this server, and we are looking to identify what the obvious and non-obvious assets are. So let's start. One example that comes to mind for me is the local data file. So photos that have been taken by this app that have not been shared or have been shared about somehow still, in that app, or at least in the data file used by that app. So we can see a local data file. In relation to the local data file, we can also have session information that is sensitive about the current user session or authentication of the current user session. So we just put session info. Okay. So another common example, obvious example, I should say, is the username and password, because usually this kind of application will require some authentication. So the username and password that will be sent across from the mobile app to the back end is an asset going along this channel. So one has got to think about how to protect it on that channel. So username and password. All right, so how about the database? Because the photos must be stored somewhere if they're supposed to be accessed by other people. So the database that has the photos as well as even the user credentials for authentication. So we can say photos plus user credentials. I just put user cred. All right then. So those are some of the obvious ones. Are there any non-obvious ones that come to your mind? Let's quickly look at a few. So one example will be the authentication module that is responsible for ensuring that authentication process goes through the right channel and that it's not possible even for a legitimate user of this app to bypass the authentication module to authenticate with the backend. So this might be something that you mitigate with some controls on your server, as well as your mobile app. But for asset purposes, let's say none of this asset is the authentication module. Authentication module, I hope you can see that. And another example is, I wonder if I could even hide this. Another example is the backend server itself, the functionality of that server. If the server is disrupted such that it cannot run, the users cannot access your service. If whether it's free these days or even if it's paid for, people don't like not being able to access something that they've come to expect is supposed to be up and available for use. Another thing with the backend functionality or the backend server is that you're paying for the uptime of the server. If through the vulnerability in the app or some other vulnerability in the configuration of the server, it's possible for an attacker to put some malware on that server. You can have instances whereby your server is then being used to launch attacks and to run phishing scams, for instance, on other people on the internet, or your server is actually being used to mine bitcoins, which consumes a lot of power, which you'll be paying for. So those are some things to think about concerning something that might not be obvious, the server functionality itself. Backend server itself is an asset. All right, there you have it. We looked at a few examples of more obvious assets and some not so obvious assets. And all of this is just starting the process. We don't mean to say this is complete, or we've started a process together. And I hope that this is helpful for you as you work on any other systems or even the systems you're working on right now. And I dare say that we would love to get your input on the content you like to see. So if there's some content or videos you want us to make, please feel free to reach out to us at team at resilientsoftwaresecurity.com. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video.